When you check into a hotel and you present your ID, do you ever think that you're giving away far more personal information than necessary? The hotel only wants to prove your identity, but now they also know your age, weight, home address, driver's license number, and more. As soon as you hand it over, you lose control. We're often asked to give away too much of our private data. Once it's out of your hands, that information can become susceptible to hacking, the sale of your personal data, or a barrage of unwanted ads. But what if there was an option to verify your personal information without giving away unnecessary, critical, private details? Verifiable credentials, a pillar of Web 5, solves this. There are digital certificates of claims that are easily shared in a private and secure way. They can prove your legal name, age, ownership of an asset, or anything really. Verifiable credentials limit the amount of data you share to only what's required, and they can't be tampered with or faked. Let's reimagine how identification could work. With Web 5, the government issues a verifiable credential that proves your identity and lives in what we call an identity wallet. So now when you check into the hotel, you present the front desk with a verifiable credential and share only what the hotel needs. This establishes that you are who you say you are, without giving away more personal information than you'd like. Verifiable credentials make proving claims easier, more private, and more secure.
Hello, happy Friday, everyone. Hope y'all are doing well. I know you all are tuned in Discord or Twitter or YouTube, and LinkedIn, all the different places that we're streaming on. So feel free to type in the chat if you have any comments or questions. So if this is your first time tuning in, this is what I'm calling TBD TV. And basically we talk with different SSI experts, which stands for self-sovereign identity, to learn what they're doing in the industry and to level up our knowledge as well. Today we have Cole, which I'm really excited to talk to him. But before we get into that, I do want to let you all know, I think I talked about this 2 weeks ago, but TBD's been on an Africa roadshow for the month of May. They went to I think Ghana and Nairobi. And I did make a little compilation, a little picture compilation of what they've been doing. It's not the coolest video ever, but it's so we can live vicariously through them. So I'm going to play that before we go ahead and introduce, chat with him.
You said, like, when I came, you said, oh, I've read some of your blogs, right? So it connects us. We live in 2 different continents. You're able to consume my content online. Beautiful thing, right? However, if I try to send you money, why is that so difficult? My first trip to Africa, I had this wonderful videographer who captured me being here and like meeting with these different developers. And before I left the U.S., I sent money to him via my bank, right? And I got here, he shot the whole thing. He still hadn't received his money. So I've already flown across the world, conducted business, flew back home, and this man still has not received this payment. That's ridiculous, right? And so this is what TBDX unlocks so that we can do like these cross-border payments, and it's just as simple as if I were to send you money on like WhatsApp.
You know, we are very much focused on the potential here in Africa. We see that the need is like really, really great here for better financial access and access to cheaper payments and access to global, global liquidity.
Okay, as you can see, the last day for it was May 28th, but hopefully we got to live vicariously through them and pretend we went too. I'm a little jealous, but all right, so enough of me talking. I do want to get to know Cole. Cole, before I ask you who you are and what you're up to, I do want to ask you a little bit of an icebreaker question, and same to the audience. Since a lot of the topic today is around music, what musical instrument or talent would have you always wanted to learn, but you never got a chance to?
Oh, wow.
Music.
I've always wanted to be a jazz pianist,
Ooh.
jazz and blues, so I could sit and just like improvise to myself. I'm a bass player in a former life. Really, I don't play much anymore. But yeah, so I got into jazz in college on the bass, but I've always idolized jazz pianists who can improvise. It just looks so fun. So someday.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot more to your life. You could definitely be one day. I would like to play the harp. I don't
Oh,
know
really?
why.
Yeah,
I feel
harp's
like
great.
it's a instrument not a lot of people know how to play, but I'm like, I feel like it won't be that hard. You do a couple of strings. I don't know. Maybe it is hard, but I think it would look cool if I played
It
that.
would look cool, and it sounds good.
All right. All right, y'all. So here's what we're going to go over for the next hour or so, give or take. We're going to do intros. Like I said, we're going to talk a little bit about how SSI can affect or impact or improve the music industry. We'll see a little bit of a demo, and then we'll open it to Q&A. So definitely, please put your questions in so that we can ask Cole and learn more about him. All right, Cole, tell us who you are, what you do. Give us the download.
So Cole Davis, I am the founder and CEO of Switchchord. Switchchord is an identity and legal tech startup focused on the music industry. So I came into this via being a corporate and entertainment lawyer. Before that, I was in finance and accounting. Before that, I was playing music. And so it's kind of a mix of a lot of different experiences I've had throughout my career. And it was born out of some frustrations when I was a lawyer back in like 2015, 2016 on the inability to map legal relationships across the music industry and the lack of communication like infrastructure. And so I just went searching for solutions. And after a few years, stumbled across this SSI stuff when it was kind of in its early stages, but immediately was like, that's it. That's what I need. So yeah, that's where we are now.
Awesome. You have a very rich background, which I'm going to ask about later. I'm like, it's just interesting that you did all of these awesome things. But like you just mentioned, right? You created Switchchord, and basically you're enabling artists to own their own music and publishing rights via SSI. I'm actually curious because I'm not in the music industry. I don't know how it works. How does music ownership and publishing rights work in maybe simple terms? Why is it so hard for artists to get their own rights? I always hear in the industry, it's oh, Megan Thee Stallion, she now owns her masters, or Taylor Swift, but I don't know why it's difficult.
Yeah, I can actually here just do the screen share, and I'll
Okay, cool.
some visuals that might help a little bit.
Okay.
Okay, so in music, there's usually always two copyrights at play. So you've what's known as a musical work in the Copyright Act. I call it a composition. It's easier to think that way. So think sheet music and lyrics. So these copyrights have been around a lot longer than recorded music. So, sheet music we've had since, go back to the printing press. So it's got a couple hundred years to formulate sort of a copyright framework for it. So what happens is you've got people who make compositions. So think of them as songwriters. So they'll write a composition or a song. Again, think sheet music, lyrics, melody, arrangement, not a specific recording, just the song. Usually what happens is songwriters are not good at monetizing those songs, like getting them recorded by Taylor Swift or Megan Thee Stallion or anyone like that. So they often will sell the copyright, assign the copyright to a music publisher. Kind of how a book author writes a manuscript and then isn't that good at, creating a print version, creating a digital version, getting into retail, making money, and then doing accounting and things like that. So you need back office help. So it's the same way in the song world. So usually you will assign ownership of the copyright in the song you wrote to a music publisher. The publisher will go make money. So they'll get it recorded, they'll get it placed into films and TV shows, and then they'll split the money with you, oftentimes 50-50. Then you have the second side of the industry. So there's two, you can divide the industry in two. The other side is called the recorded music industry. That's where you have recording artists who record versions of songs in what's called a sound recording. So it's a separate copyright under the Copyright Act. This one is much more recent because the technology is more recent. You know, like we didn't have a way to record songs until kind of the early 1900s in wax cylinders and things like that. And so sound recording copyrights are often owned and administered by record companies, because usually the recording artists will sign a contract that says, yeah, I'll make recordings for you. You go make me money. In exchange, you're going to pay me royalties. So that's usually what happens. There's a contract on both sides, a contract that sort of connects the writer to the publisher and the recording artist to the record company. And that contract is going to dictate like who owns what and has the right to do what with the underlying copyrights. And there's always going to be a song embedded within the sound recording. So that's like the basic framework for the music industry for copyright that we need to understand for this. As a precursor to why SSI, why decentralized identity is so important. You have a lot of different industry identifiers that are used throughout the supply chain. And this is how you get paid. Like you got to have these things. This is how you get tracked, and your music where it's used gets tracked throughout the world. And it's how you route royalties back. So it's very important to have these, that they're correct and that they are populated accurately throughout the supply chain. Because if they're not, people don't know who to pay. So that's one important thing that will sort of tease out what we do with it. One other thing I'll show you is, so in the music industry, why people get overwhelmed with it is this is it. This is the music industry. If you zoom,
that's crazy.
like this is every participant and every legal contract. And so, yes, it's really complex, but if you simplify it into a supply chain, which exists in every industry, you kind of can think of it as raw materials, which are songwriters and recording artists, right? That's like raw materials being creativity. And they get manufactured into a product by music publishers for the songs and record companies for the recording. And then you have a product, which is a musical recording. Like it's a digital file, it's a vinyl album, it doesn't matter. That has to get to retail. So there are distribution agreements with retailers. Most of them are now digital, and most of our retail stores are digital, like streaming and digital service providers. There's still physical, but it's, you know, a much smaller part of the industry now. So there are contracts that dictate the flow of data and that dictate like the flow of rights. So this is why people get overwhelmed. It's really complex because, yeah, it's just a complex supply chain.
Yeah. Oh, I'm echoing. Hold on. Testing. Okay. I guess I had another window open with me in it, or with the stream in it.
Oh, cool.
But what I was going to say is I can definitely see how all of this could be overwhelming. I didn't realize there were so many different parts, and I've never even thought of it as like a supply chain. So thank you for that background. That was really interesting. Next thing I wanted to talk to you about is, you mentioned that you were a lawyer. I seen your LinkedIn, you wrote like you're a musician, lawyer, banker, technology. Mm-hmm. That's like a lot of things. So I'm curious, like what events happened in your life that inspired you to eventually create Switchchord? I think you mentioned it a little bit, but we'll love for you to be deeper.
There's a couple key events that sort of kicked my life in different directions and led to this. The first would be back in, I think I was like 14 or 15. And so I wanted to be like a Division I or pro soccer player. Like that's all I did was play soccer. I always liked music, but I never played it. And then I got hurt. And so I couldn't really play for about a year. And so being kind of an overachiever, perfectionist, I needed something to do. So my mom just brought home a bass guitar, and my brother just started playing the regular guitar. And so I started taking lessons, started practicing hours a day, got pretty good at it. And so that's what got me into the music world, more than just a fan of listening, but like really getting into music theory and performance and everything that comes along with being like a musician. And then just I've always been interested in music and like psychology, the brain, just everything about music as a language. So I went to college, thought about being like a music neuroscientist when I went in, but I ended up doing finance and accounting. So that was like a really good basis to understand commercial applications. And then I went into commercial banking, mainly because my finance professor said, well, if you do investment bank or consulting, you're not going to have time to play music in your band. So I did that. Commercial banking is a pretty relatively easy career. I mean, it's like 9 to 5 type stuff. So I could still play a lot of music. Then one of the other things that really changed the course was in the band I was playing in, we got a cease and desist letter from a band in California saying, hey, you got to change your name. We're using the name. And, you know, we're like 19 or 20 years old. We don't really know better. We're like, I guess we got to change our name. And then we have recorded 1 or 2 albums. And out of just curiosity, I was Googling, you know, how to copyright albums. And I thought both were really interesting problems, trademarks and copyrights. And so I learned that that's what's called intellectual property. And I read All You Need to Know About the Music Industry by Donald Passman, which is kind of like the Bible that everyone starts with. And that's when I realized, like, oh, wow, that's a career. Cool. I think I'd rather do that. So I went back to law school with the intention of being a music lawyer. I got sidetracked doing corporate law for a few years just because of my background in finance, accounting, and banking, but was sort of tried to moonlight on the IP side, eventually switched to a more of an entertainment focused practice. And then I would say the other big event that kicked me into what I'm now doing was as a lawyer, just getting super annoyed with how inefficient some of these things were, like representing filmmakers and ad agencies. The partner I used to work for had a decent amount of those clients. So I would help them on strategy and licensing music and trying to track down who owns what in order to contact them to ask for a license. And there's no central database of copyright ownership. It's a quirk of international copyright law because we don't want to condition protection on being forced to register because there's costs involved there. So you want people to be able to create and have copyright protection like for free. That's important. So you can have a copyright, like the moment you and I write a song or write a poem together, we have copyright protection. Can we sue someone? Maybe, maybe not. It depends on country to country. There's rules on how you can bring a lawsuit. So because of that, it's really hard to track who owns what. There's not a central database, and that surprises people, but it's just the way it is. So we have a bunch of silo databases for different parts of the music supply chain. So that big network I just showed, there's databases all over that thing. And those databases have information in them that relates to ownership and rights, like administer copyrights across territories, across media types. Like it's very complex. So I was just kind of amazed that there weren't better ways to represent copyrights, like in a digital format. And I was really frustrated by the inability to have communication workflows built in. Like you got to go track down all these different people, and then you got to figure out how do I even contact them. And so that kind of ate at me for about a year, nights and weekends. And the old partner I work for, who's kind of a mentor, finally was like, this is all you talk about. It's all you think about. Just go figure it out. And I had asked a lot of my friends who are in the tech world, like, hey, how would I solve this? And no one really knew. The best anyone could do is point to Ethereum. This is in 2015, 2016, like really early days, and be like, I think that's going to solve it. So I quit in 2017, March 2017, quit being a lawyer, saved up a bunch of money, and I just started studying technology, starting with Bitcoin and then Ethereum, and then that whole world. Blockchain is what led me to decentralized identity. And again, that's where we are years later, but that was kind of the start of this crazy research journey I went on.
That's kind of cool, like how it all led to all of that. Wait, this is maybe a random question and something you said. You said that you had to change the name because you didn't know any better. Is there a world where you could have just said, no, we're not changing the name, or like sue them of your band when you were
Yeah. So trademark law is interesting. Trademark is a creature of the like federal law. So under the Commerce Clause in the Constitution, we can have a Trademark Act. And so Congress has passed a federal Trademark Act. But if multiple people are using the same name and they don't register at the federal level, you can have like state protection or what's called common law trademarks. And so that's what would have happened. Like this band in California didn't register with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. And so they didn't have federal protection nationwide. And we're over here playing in our little Texas band and going on local tours in Texas and Oklahoma and Louisiana. So we've kind of built up a following here. They've kind of built a following in California. And this actually happens quite a bit. And again, this is trademark, not copyright, different. But since neither of us had registered federally, you don't have like federal preemption of other people. You're sort of subject to their territory where their mark is known. So we could have coexisted. And this was before, it's not before the internet, but this is before, this is 2006, 2007. Yeah.
Before the internet was really popping.
Yeah, before it was really what it is now. And so, yeah, maybe they had a little Facebook page. We had a MySpace page, but it's not necessarily like our Texas fans. Trademark is all about protecting consumers from confusion.
Yeah,
for the most part. And like our Texas fans aren't getting confused by this California ban. So we actually could have coexisted. If one of us got really big, then maybe we start to overpower the other. Maybe we register federally and stuff. But yeah, looking back, we could have kept the name.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, it worked out just fine.
That makes a lot of sense. And I was going to ask, like, how did you go from lawyer to SSI? But you kind of like described that like it started to become your passion and you started to look into it. So I have another question instead. And it's more around like, okay, I feel like, or how do I want to phrase this? Basically, I'm curious on, even before we get into the demo, could you describe how you make the platform user friendly for artists? Because I'm sure they don't want to like dig into decentralized identity or anything blockchain. They're just like, or any publishers or anybody. They're just like, I just want to get rights for my music.
Yeah, it's tricky. So we tend to bury everything in the background, and we want you to think you're just using a very simple web app, the same that you've always used. We have some little hints of decent, like we show your did in the interface, but we're not forcing you to use wallets. We're not forcing you to, we've kind of abstracted as much complexity away and kept the system design and the architecture as simple as possible so that it doesn't feel like you're using decentralized identity. We've actually set it up to where it's decentralizable over time, so we can take baby steps. So as people get more comfortable with things like key management and wallets and all these new concepts, we can hand off your keys. We can sort of baby step you into this world, because it's similar to the Bitcoin world. Like if you lose your keys, then you lose your coins. So it's as we know, similar in the identity world. Like if you lose the private key associated with your decentralized identifier and you can't make statements anymore and you can't rotate that key out, like that identity is kind of dead. And so it's something we think about quite a bit, and we want to push that off as long as possible.
That makes sense. You're kind of doing like a slow education for users. Okay. Yep. Before we go into the demo, I want to interact with the audience. So I'm going to say hi to them and highlight some of their comments. And then y'all are going to play a little quiz, y'all. So the quiz is going to happen. Type your answers in the comments. Don't be afraid. It's nothing scary. It's just a way for us to all learn. So I'm just going to say hi to Ace. How you doing? And Angie. Thanks for tuning in. And Torben as well. How are you? And also to Mo. So thanks for tuning in, y'all. I am going to press play on the quiz. Definitely to go do your thing. Put your answers in the comments. I kind of make some of them a little tricky, but some of them are repeats from last week. So you should be able to get some of them. All right, I'm going to press play. Awesome. Thanks for playing, y'all. We also had a comment from Torben that said, we've done quite a bit of blockchain work in the music industry, so excited to hear about this project. All right, so without further ado, we're going to have you share your screen. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and click it and go ahead and give us the demo, the little download on how Switchchord works.
Cool. Okay, so what we ended up building using this technology and talking with a lot of music publishers over the past 2 years was a way to get data from point A to point B. Point A being anywhere music is created. So it could be a recording studio, it could be a writer room at a publisher in Nashville, it could be in your bedroom, you're making music in the bedroom. If you need to get that information into the supply chain, how can we speed that up just as fast as possible? And can we make it go from out in the field into a publisher's sort of copyright management system as accurately and fast as possible? Because that's what's going to then your publisher will register it into that giant supply chain, that legal network I showed you. All the data from out in the field needs to go into the supply chain. So the data out in the field is, who are you as a writer? Who did you write with? Does the other writer have a publisher? What did you write? And we're only focused on music publishing in this demo. We're working on the same thing on the master recording side. Remember, there's 2 sides to the industry, but we started with music publishing because it's a lot more complex and it happens first, right? The song is always first and then there's a recording of the song. So we want to make sure that we get the identity-based framework correct at the very top of the supply chain. So this is a 2-sided platform where creative side is over here on the right and then a publisher dashboard view is on the left. The creator side is accessible by writers and their representatives. So managers, lawyers, even A&R representatives, anyone who represents the songwriter. And we do that with also the identity system. So everything comes down to identity. Who are you? Like, are you who you say you are? And can you do what you claim you can do? So the first thing we do is we give you a DID web, a decentralized identity in the background. So you've got this persistent digital identity right there. And what we do is some human verification. So selfie, driver's license, passport scan. So we verify that you are an actual human and we kind of bind this information to your DID. So there's industry identifiers like an IPI number and an ISNI numbers. These are used in different parts of the supply chain. We verify these based on the verified information we get from right up here. So there can be multiple Cole Davis songwriters. There's a lot of John Smiths. We want to make sure that you are that John Smith with this IPI number, or else you can get confused in the supply chain. This happens quite a bit. So we verify these, and then we bind those to your decentralized identifier. And a lot of this uses credentials in the background. We can map your personas in too, because a lot of times people in the music industry act with stage names and personas, and those themselves can have unique identifiers, IPIs and ISNIs. So we verify and we map those. Because what we're doing is we're mapping legal relationships between writers and publishers and recording companies. Like, we're just mapping legal relationships. You can act in different capacities depending on your persona. So maybe I'm acting as a producer one day with this persona with a different IPI. Maybe I'm acting as a songwriter one day, and I can have different legal relationships depending on how I'm acting, right? So we're always modeling the relationships based on how people are behaving. So this is, and then we map in your publishing relationship. So like I said, usually songwriters sell their copyright to music publishers for the songs they write, oftentimes for a limited amount of time, say 1 year. They say, everything I write in the next year is going to be owned by you, publisher. You go make me money and send me half of it. So this would be what we call a self-published, like I own my copyrights, I own my publishing. But what we're going to do is connect the writer side to the publisher side via the identity system. So publishers have DID web DIDs in the background too. And what we're going to do right here is sign Cole, and we're going to model the legal relationship that is within a songwriter agreement, because the legal relationship is going to dictate like the state of the ultimate copyright, like who owns it, if we're trying to model the ownership of the copyright in a digital version of it. And it's also going to kind of dictate where data should flow. You know, like if we know that Cole is signed to this Steamroller Publishing, we know that data should probably go to Steamroller Publishing. So we are going to populate a verifiable, this is the W3C's VC data model. We'll say everything Cole writes until, for simplicity, we'll say the end of this year is going to be owned 100% by this publisher.
So this part is creating a verifiable credential in the background.
Correct.
Awesome.
Yeah. And so like it could be, you can have, there's differences in ownership versus administration. So maybe I keep ownership of my copyright, but I'm going to hire this publisher to just go make me money, and I'll pay them 15% of the money that they give to me as a fee. Or I can sell the full copyright. I can sell half the copyright. So we're just modeling the way the music industry works. I'm going to not talk about that because that gets in the weeds. So what's going to happen is the publisher is going to look at the data and they're going to digitally sign it. So we're issuing a credential in the background. On the writer side, we see that they sent me a request to connect. I can see that, yep, that's my publisher. Those are my terms. Okay, cool. I'll accept and sign it. So now when we go back to my identity page, we can see I've now got, I'm a verified identity. I've got a verified publisher connection. We're pulling in the first party data from the publisher. So the writer's not entering it and doing it wrong, which happens a lot. And now we've got an active connection between the two. So things that happen over here are going to show up in the publisher dashboard here. And like the credential lives right here. So if I flip it, that's the actual VC data model.
Wow.
There's the digital signature by the publisher. So we use credentials to map the legal relationships because that's what's going to route the data. So now I can go back to, let's create a new song and see what happens. So I can call this the TBD song, and we'll say that it's, I don't know, maybe it's blues, soul blues, sure. And so I can write with one of my personas, right? So that might pull in different unique identifiers for the industry. I can claim that I wrote 50% and I own 50%. And that's going to drop me into what we call the workspace. So you can think of this as kind of a just a deal room of sorts, like an abstract deal room where if you have permission, you can enter and do things. In this case, you can document the new composition. And so, like I said, we have ways for managers and lawyers to enter this deal room by presenting a credential. So the writer issues a credential to the manager saying, yeah, this is my manager. You have the ability to do things on my behalf, including sign legal contracts, so power of attorney. So my manager can log in, present the credential, and now they're in the deal room to do the workspace to do this on my behalf. Because a lot of times what happens is the managers or the people at the publisher actually do this instead of the writer, but we built it to be flexible enough to where writers can do it themselves too.
So just for clarity, the credential is giving your manager or whoever is the authorized person permission to do things on your behalf. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. Yep.
Okay, cool.
Yes, we always want to be tracking who is doing what. Who are they? And do they have the capabilities to do what they claim they do? So we do require identity verification of anyone who's acting on your behalf. So they have to go through that, selfie, driver's license, passport, because you're effectively giving someone else control. We want to make sure that you're not getting, defrauded there. Okay, so now like within here, we can do things like, drop in lyrics. This gets a little music specific. We can tag the lyrics. This gets into some music metadata standards. We can drop in different demos, give them names. I'll call this demo TBD. Maybe I don't want this to be shown publicly. I just want it to be available to my publisher. So I can add that file. And let's say I also have a master recording. I can drop that in and rename it. And then I'll show this one publicly. So it's when someone ultimately, what we're doing is we're populating a copyright identity. And so identities are resolvable, right? So you want to say what can be shown if someone resolves the identity. So
this is so cool to me. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, you're good. So what's happening over on the publisher side, since we have that connection, is my publisher can see that Cole's working on the TBD song. Okay, cool. Now my publisher can even listen to the demos as they're happening. You can see the lyrics. So we're making it sort of a real-time collaborative environment. Now let's go invite my co-writer. So if we're in the same room, you can just scan the QR code, but I will say I write with Bob a lot. This defaults to what we normally do. So let's add Bob. So he's going to get invited to the workspace. Now we can formalize it. Let's get Bob into the workspace real fast. Okay, so he can join with one of his stage names. He has a did as well. So Bob is going to be dropped in. Bob can go in and make changes if he wants to. He can, it's like I said, it's a collaborative environment. And what we're doing, so now the metadata looks good. We have an agreement on who owns the copyright, the initial state, which is the songwriters. And so this is, in the music industry, it's called a split sheet. The dirty secret is a lot of times this doesn't happen. It gets figured out after the fact, which is not good, because let's say 10 people collaborate to write a song and they don't discuss this stuff. So did they mean it to be 10% each? I don't know. If that song becomes a hit, people start remembering things differently. So it's good practice to do split sheets, just because it sort of locks in your relationship so that no one can, say things later that weren't necessarily what you agreed to.
You mean like they're saying like, I actually wrote that song by myself or something like that?
Yeah, it happens. I mean, there can be, it can impact friendships. It can impact, like in Nashville, it's very common that it's equal no matter what. You got 3 writers, it's 33% each. It kind of depends on like the local ecosystem. Like LA is not that way. New York is not quite that way. Nashville's that way. Contemporary Christian music is often like Nashville. You just assume it's equal. But so like pop and hip hop, you can have 10 to 20 collaborators. Like that gets really in the weeds on who is not just credit, like who has ownership. And because of the way the relationships work between the writers and their publishers, the publishers have an interest too. If you're a writer, claims that they wrote 10%, and then all of a sudden it shows up as 2% in the supply chain, you as the publisher are getting a lot less money. So this is just, it happens. So why identity is so important is you can have verifiable statements made at any step in the process. You have an identity, a persistent identity with a reputation that is making statements. And so it creates almost like an audit trail of at least who did what when. So we are going to formalize this with an actual contract. So we're pulling in the information from that workspace. So the writers, their contributions, their ownership splits, and this is just some legalese that publishers want to see. So I can add my signature. And then, all right, so I'm good. I signed. At the bottom, we're always, again, pulling in the identity information from your identity, your decentralized identities, your personas, as well as your publishers. So we always want verified first-party identity information. Let's go sign this for Bob. Okay, so Bob can review the contract. Let's just say he's good with it. And again, this could be the manager signing if the credential the manager has gives them power of attorney to sign. If not, it's going to kick you an error saying, hey, you don't have authority to actually sign this contract. Okay, so now we've got a fully executed contract that's going to get emailed to everyone involved. So we'll download it. So now we've got, let me zoom in. Okay, so this acts as a bit of a summary of what we just did. So here's the legal contract, what we just saw, digital signatures, timestamps. The cool thing about decentralized identity is you've got digital signatures built in. Like you don't need DocuSign and HelloSign. You have these cross-platform cryptographic-based identities. It's so important. You've got your identity information, your legal relationships, your persona information, and then your lyrics. So what happens in the music industry is usually songwriters, once they finish writing a song, they'll text their publisher this information. They'll say, hey, I wrote a song with Bob. It's called the TBD song, equal splits. So then the person, the publisher, will manually enter it into a spreadsheet and then email that to operations. Operations will manually enter it into the copyright management system, which is then used to populate the supply chain that I showed you earlier.
Yeah.
So this is where publishers told us 2 years ago, like, can you use this amazing thing you've come up with to just get that data out in the field into our copyright management system really fast? We're like, yeah, that's actually not, that's totally doable. So, so you can forward this PDF to your publisher, right? But we want everything to be machine readable and we want everything to be verifiable. So that's where this comes in. You can scan this with your phone, anyone who's on the chat, and you'll be resolving your first copyright identity. So what we do is this goes back to that theoretical thing I was looking for in 2016 was how can we represent a copyright, an asset, but a copyright in like a digital version, but I want it to be inherently tied to the legal system. I want that to be born out of legal contracts and ultimately born out of like the Constitution. We can't have the Constitution in digital form, but how can we at least, use the contracts? Because the legal contracts are what are going to dictate the state of the copyright: ownership, administration, credits, who did what. So that's what we're doing here. So we give the composition itself another, for now it's that did web did, and we are nesting the information from that workspace, the metadata within it. Remember, we permissioned the master to be public available, even though the demo was not. We've got our verified songwriter identities. We've got our publishers that are already mapped in via the credential from the publisher to me. So we know that, yeah, I wrote 50% in that contract. We also know that Steamroller owns 100% of what I do if I write this within that term of the contract. So I think it was till the end of this year. So that's very helpful because now we've mapped all of the legal relationships relating to this composition. All of these identities themselves are resolvable. So we can resolve the publisher. And again, getting into the did world. So you have did documents, you have service endpoints. So the service endpoints can be anything. The service endpoints can be where to send messages. It can be where to store data in like a DWN. So it's a very flexible, powerful system from like a communication mechanism. And that's what I was looking for back in 2016 was I want a way to route messages. And so we're repurposing like what an asset can be represented as in a way to act as like a routing mechanism. So we've got our publishers, we've got our writers, right? They're all resolvable. And so what's cool is all of this information is machine readable. So all the publishers need the same data. And then other parts of the supply chain need this data. Everyone needs this data. And currently it's just sent around the supply chain with text messages and emails and phone calls. Once it gets into a copyright management system, there are some standard metadata formats that are used to then communicate with the supply chain, but just getting them in that format is very hard. So that's what we do. It's all machine readable and we connect it with the publishers. So now on the publisher side, we see we've got this final, we got a split sheet, we got everything. We know Cole wrote it with this guy, Bob. He's not one of our writers, but we can still see his publishers. And from here, this is where we're working with all the sort of copyright and catalog management companies for integration. So we can just push this via APIs or CSV files into those systems.
Awesome.
So that's the demo. You're left with this, wonderful representation of an asset that is dynamic so that if, this publisher sells the copyright, there are ways to pull in the identity of the buyer. So it's like a dynamic system and it gets away from that whole, siloed databases. It's really powerful because you can slot this into the kind of legacy workflows and legacy infrastructure in the industry. And all this information sort of travels along with it.
That's awesome. All right. So first off, it's very robust. We have one question and a couple of comments. And now we're going down to time. But one question from Torben Anderson is like, what has been the industry uptake? I guess they're asking, maybe have people been adopting this? Is that what you're asking, Torben? Or
yeah. So industry uptake, it's funny. So we don't use blockchain for anything. We are totally we like to say
blockchain less.
Yeah, we use did web for now just because it doesn't involve blockchain. We did DHT, but we do need a way if we're representing copyrights. We need pretty robust key rotation. And so did DHT is kind of like it's a much better version of did key or some of those, but they're still working on key rotation. Once key rotation's in there,
you'll switch over?
Yeah, well, I mean, I love DHT. I remember Dan telling me what they were doing, Dan and Gabe, a year ago. I was like, oh my God, that's cool. So we're kind of ultimately we want it to be a bring your own identity, so you should be able to, if you're a writer and you got a DHT based all right, cool. Come document your stuff in a workspace, create the copyright identity. When you resolve the identity, you're going to see a did DHT instead of a did web. That's the ultimate goal. To get there, and this goes back to the industry uptake thing, we can't require, it has to be as simple as possible to where people aren't even thinking about cryptography or credentials or wallets. We don't use blockchain. The music industry doesn't trust blockchain because unfortunately there were a lot of people that hyped it up way too much in the industry, saying it was going to solve the industry's problems. And so there's been like a lot of sort of burnout and pushback against that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think it's an interesting approach that y'all are taking to go blockchainless, similar to TBD, to go blockchainless. We're like decentralized identity. We think that's like the way to go though. And I like that you're trying to make sure it's not complicated for the user. I guess this question is also related. Someone's asking, or Tanya's asking, how fast is onboarding new folks onto your platform?
Yeah, so we are currently running pilots where we onboard the writers, because we have to issue the credentials and map, the information in those songwriter agreements. So we're currently working with music publishers to do it. So there's some decent amount of hand-holding. We haven't opened up any sort of self-serve product yet. We will eventually, but we don't want to overwhelm people with complexity. And so we're doing most of the onboarding where effectively the writer receives an email from the publisher saying, hey, we're using this new platform, click here to get started. This really helps us, the publisher, get your information registered and get you paid faster. Wow. So we kind of do everything in the background. So when they click the email, like what they're doing is accepting the credential, and then we're onboarding them. We're doing the identity verification. They don't really know, and they don't need to know.
Yeah.
So the onboarding right now is a little more manual, just because there's a lot of hand holding. But in the future, we will have it much more like automated.
Yeah, and I could definitely see you all taking that or going in that direction. Another person asked, can you apply this to an EP or an entire album, or just song by song currently?
So yes, the answer is to both. You can do it to EPs, full albums. We're only, like I said, we are laser focused on music publishing first, because it's the top of the supply chain, and you have to have that done right, correctly, before the recording of that. So a big problem in the music industry is that recorded music, sound recordings, get released through distribution platforms onto Spotify and all that before there is a match between the composition and the recording. So let's say a bunch of us write a song. There's 10 of us that write a song. Great. That song then gets recorded by Beyonce. That's pretty cool. Beyonce, her team pushes it out to the supply chain via digital distributors, and now it's on Spotify. Well, oftentimes it happens before we're able to formalize the composition side. So now this song is out there this recording is out there making money. And then part of that money needs to be paid back to the songwriters and the publishers. But unfortunately, those are not married. And so there is an after the fact process of, okay, now we got to figure out what is the song, and we got to figure out who are the publishers and who are the writers. So they're two separate concepts, and we're working on the recorded music side because it's the same thing. Imagine the workflows I just showed, but you're in the studio and you're agreeing on the credits. Like, okay, I play guitar and I did this, and you're mapping the relationship between the recording artist and the record label. Now you've got a DID that can represent the sound recording, and you can actually marry it to the DID that represents the composition via a credential to represent that legal relationship, which is known as a mechanical license in the music industry. So you can actually marry all these things with cryptography before the standard industry identifiers are even issued. So it's a really cool way to solve some very hard, to me, it's the only way to solve these problems. It's been an open question for like decades on how can you marry those two sides, the composition and the recording. And I am convinced that this is the only way to do it. So what's cool is, okay, now the recording identity has a link to the composition identity, and all the writers and publishers are resolvable. All the performers are resolvable. You can embed that identity itself into the audio file, and it can then be extracted with fingerprinting or watermarking technology. So now we get into how you stop streaming fraud. So streaming fraud is a very big problem in the music industry. People uploading stuff they actually don't own, and they claim they do own it. Well, okay, so now you got two sound recordings, like audio files. One of them has these beautiful watermarks with these beautiful verifiable identities and credentials behind it, and one of them has nothing and was uploaded by Joe in his garage. Like, which one do you think is the authentic version? So it's really powerful when you work it into things like that.
Awesome. I think that answered a lot of different questions that I had written out. Like, I was going to ask, are there other ways do you think there's other ways to solve this? Is this the only way? You just said you think this is the only way.
I think this is the best way. You can solve it other ways, but it's not as interoperable.
Yeah,
And
I
the
love
problem with trying to get everyone on one blockchain is it effectively acts as another database. It's just a distributed database. You've got to figure out how to have these things live across databases. And until we have, the whole TCP/IP for blockchains, like I think the identity way is the only way to do it.
Awesome. All right, my camera always overheats, but we're gonna work through it. Okay, so I just want to, as we're coming down to the end, I'll highlight a couple of comments, just people saying they really like this or it was interesting. I have one last question for you before we go into the fun questions, and hopefully I can make it before my camera overheats again, but that's all right. People were just saying this is really interesting content. I think when you mentioned people switching up, or needing split sheets. Someone mentioned like, oh, Drake is maybe notorious for claiming that he did more than he needed to. And people are just saying nice work. They really like it. This is super interesting. So thank you so much for sharing all of this with us. I only had one other question, and I think you kind of started to answer it. And it was around, oh, actually I have two questions. I don't know. Okay, make the answers really short. One was around like, how are you handling varying copyright laws and regulations across different countries? And then the other was around like AI generated music. Like, for example, I know some artists are really upset at AI generated music, and then I see some artists actually using it, like Drake, like used AI generated music of like Tupac and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I'm curious how Switchchord solves that. So first the copyright across countries, and then the AI.
Yeah. Copyright across country is tricky. Like I said, there's no one database. There's also no one like copyright law across the world. It's different because what copyright does is sort of it's regulating culture, and we view culture differently across different jurisdictions and cultures. So there are some differences, but for the most part, copyright law has been harmonized via international treaties. The identity framework still works well because, again, we're just mapping legal relationships as they exist in whatever jurisdiction you're in. So we're only focused on the US right now. And then we'll branch out to other English-speaking countries or common law countries, kind of the UK and its historical territories. Other parts of the world follow what's known as civil law or different legal systems. So there's slight differences there. But again, the identity system is very flexible because you're just mapping statements made by people. And so it's flexible enough to work wherever it is. So yeah, that's kind of the international copyright law part. The AI part is really interesting. We've had a lot of interest in what we do for that. It's not our core focus, but again, it comes back to like statements made by identities with reputations. And so can you make a statement that I did this and AI did this? So we focus on the copyright and legal aspect. There is an organization, not organization, it's a group, sort of an open source standards group called the Content Authenticity Initiative. And then their standards organization is CTPA. So they're fantastic. A lot of it was spearheaded by Adobe and a couple others. I know Intel was one of the early adopters. But so they're doing great work as far as like data supply chains go. So who did what on the ones and zeros as a digital file goes through the supply chain. They focus on photography and video for now, because it's just what they do is get in with the hardware manufacturers. So your Canon and Nikon camera is digitally signing the file when you take the picture. When you change it in Photoshop, you are effectively making a digital signature on what you did. And then when it's showing on New York Times, you'll have what's called a content credential that you can extract and see kind of who did what in the chain of signatures. So that's on like data provenance, and is very important for AI because now you can look at, okay, was this modified in the process, when, and who did what? And you can compare the files and look at what was changed. So we're actually working on that implementation on the sound recording side, because we want to marry that. So you have legal and then you have data provenance, including things like AI. Because like for Drake, what's interesting, if you generate something with AI right now, at least in the US, it is not copyrightable. And so if you generate the lyrics with AI, but then you write the melody and then you record a version of it, you can't get paid on the lyrics. So we need to be able to have like digital statements on the parts of the file itself. Like that's how granular this is going to need to become. So yeah, there's a lot of applications to the AI world.
I am excited about you all working on that part. I don't know why I find it so interesting every time I hear like, oh, Adobe's working on like AI generated like images and all that. I'm like, oh, that's so interesting to me. Okay, so thank you so much. I think this was, at least for me, it was really edifying to learn about how SSI can work in these different industries. And also every time I hear about like identities being used for more than just like a person, you know what I mean? Because you said like for copyright identity and a couple others, I'm always like really interested in how that all like comes together. My last questions are just the fun questions. We're transitioning out of like the tech and the product. Yeah. And the first question is just since you're a music person, what's the most memorable concert you've ever been to?
Man, that one's tricky. I remember seeing Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young when I was about 16, I think, or 17. I went with my dad. That was like a very early, big one. To see the four of them together was interesting, you know, because they'd always been fighting. I've seen a lot of Fish shows in my day, and so several of those are up there as some of the top. I recently saw them at the Sphere in Vegas, and pretty mind blowing. So definitely recommend going to the Sphere. That's got to be one of the top ones.
I'm so tired of this camera always overheating. Okay. I'm like really trying. But okay, last question and we'll wrap up. Y'all won't have to see me click my camera on and off. Last question. And you said you don't really have the greatest answer to this backstage. But that's okay. What's your favorite Beyonce song? I'm a huge Beyonce fan. Yeah. And I was hoping since you are a music person but you have a different preference in music.
Yeah, I think Beyonce is extremely talented. I mean, I know more of her older catalog. I haven't listened to as much of the recent stuff. So big fan. She's a fellow Texan. But yeah, I don't know that I have like a favorite Beyonce song necessarily. I have a very eclectic musical taste. It kind of depends on your mood. A lot of jazz, a lot of rock and blues and world music. So it just kind of depends on my mood at the time.
Nice. I'm down with that. The only jazz I know is like Robert Glasper, I guess.
Oh yeah.
Okay, cool. At least I know a little. All right, y'all. So if you found Switchchord interesting, please go check it out at switchchord.com. I think you can like create an account for free and try it out. Is that the case?
Yeah, the writer side is free. The business model, we charge music publishers. Ooh. So it's free if you want to go in there and goof around.
Yeah.
Let us know.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thanks to the audience as well for their really great questions too, and just staying engaged. I will see you all next week. And for June, we have a couple of cool ones planned. So make sure you tune in every Friday at 12 p.m. ET. All right. Bye, y'all.
We announced it. TVDex 1.0 SDK is now out.
TVDex is an open protocol that makes moving value around the world much more efficient and streamlined. We're solving this problem with TVDex by building a standard open source protocol that anyone can use for free and plug into.
We're super excited to have developers be able to start looking at this technology and start implementing it. We've put together a new financial protocol that we believe can fundamentally revolutionize the way that we think about transmitting value around the world.